Take it easy. Take it easy.
All right, welcome into the pod. Nate Evans here, and I'm here with Tony Zuma.
Hello.
Tony, I got an easy question for you.
All right.
Super simple, super easy to wrap your head around. Not a question people have been trying to figure out the answer to since humans have been a thing. Here it is. What do you do with suffering? What do you do when life gets really hard? And how do you deal with it in a way that doesn't result in you falling apart in part
Ooh,
or completely?
ooh, man. Why do I feel
There
like
you go.
shutting down is not the right answer to this easy question?
I mean, you could say, "What do I do personally?" And you could say, "What I do is shut down, and what I do is fall apart." But I guess maybe, I mean, everyone deals with that, obviously,
Yeah,
which is
absolutely.
why it's a universal question, which is why when I say easy, I've got to have my tongue in my cheek. But how do you deal with that when it inevitably happens in a way that doesn't result in you collapsing or becoming a basket case or doing things you regret, et cetera, et
Mhm.
cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, doing things you regret, man, you saying that and, just thinking about times in my life when, yeah, neither you nor I have always had smooth sailing, and I think that's the case with anyone who would listen to this.
Yeah.
But I do think that a lot of times it's really easy to just emotionally respond to situations, to lash out in a moment whenever it involves someone else. But for me, it lashing out at myself, lashing out in ways that I do regret later on. Like that unfortunately, when I look at my past, that is something that resonates with me. And so I think like my easy answer to your easy question it has to start with the first step of identifying and figuring out what do I want to do reflexively? Like, how do I myself w- feel like I need to respond in this terrible situation or this uncalled for situation? Because if I don't identify, hey, this is my pleasure pill, this is the thing that I take that numbs my body,
Mm,
numbs my mind
the
when it
vice.
comes to, yeah, this vice or doing something that I regret. If I don't recognize that and what that looks like for me, if I don't do that first, then man, it's game over because then I don't even have time to think about, well,
Yeah.
how would I like to
Then
handle
it's
this if I'm
yeah, just
thinking
a
about later?
habitual coping mechanism that you
Yeah.
default to.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, let me let
absolutely.
me let me back it up actually and ask
Mhm.
you this. I'm curious. And we for anyone listening, we're not necessarily going to go into like details of like here's the hardest times of my life, but we might touch on some things.
I
But what I'm
might. Okay.
curious from you, Tony, is when hard times are hard, when they just hit. Like obviously everything's different and nothing is cookie cutter,
Mhm.
but there are often consistent threads through
Mm.
life experiences, whether like high moments in life or low moments in life. There are threads that for us make them the high moments or make them the low moments. So for you, what's what makes a hard time hard? Like what's
Mhm.
the hardest part about going through whatever you would consider suffering?
For me, it's definitely isolation.
Mm,
I know I've learned this about myself a long time ago, and, this is also what I was alluding to earlier. Everyone is gonna be different in this regard. But for me, I am an extrovert to the sense that this might sound foreign to a lot of introverts listening. I actually enjoy being re-energized around people. Like
mm,
when I'm by myself for an extended period of time, even if things aren't that bad, it's just not how my battery charges, right?
yeah.
And so when a situation does come up that is that bad, that is unexpected, that is something that I feel I may or may not be strong enough for, the biggest threat for me really is isolation. It really is shutting down in such a way where the only voice that I hear is my own and not the version of me that is truly me. It's the
Mm,
version of me that is quick to criticize, that's quick to identify what went wrong, and why it's your fault it went wrong, and quick to be my own worst critic, honestly.
Mhm.
And so that is definitely something that no matter, I alluded to vices and pleasure pills, try to figure out, first step of what would I like to avoid in this situation. It really does come down to isolation for me. I need to make sure that I'm not ignoring my friends. I'm not ignoring my wife, who is my best friend, and not ignoring the output that other people put into my life. That without that, I know I would not be the version of me that is truly me. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah, totally. And follow-up question to what you just said. Do you find that you being an extrovert, when things get hard and when you start in what you described as kind of that spiral of being quick to identify what went wrong and what you
Mhm,
did, and like
mhm,
self-condemnation is how I would kind of put it.
yeah.
Do you find that you default to pulling away, like self-isolating?
I would say yes. You always hear the story of like the two wolves inside of you, or maybe you have or haven't, but there's
I've seen
always
some
that.
I've seen some good memes about it, but yeah.
Yeah, it's like which wolf is stronger, right? The dark
Uh,
one or the light one, and the answer is which one that you feed, right?
the wolf that wants to go to bed at 10 o'clock, or the wolf that wants to stay up till 3 a.m.
Yeah,
playing
my 3 a.m. wolf is
playing
strong.
playing Windows 95 solitaire. Like,
Exactly,
that second
exactly.
wolf always wins for me. I don't know what to do about it.
Oh, but yeah, I mean, I would say that especially the younger version of me, and I'm not just talking age, but I'm talking just growth in emotional intelligence. That is the wolf that wins. That is the instinctive reflex that I have of, all right, something's gone wrong. It's obviously my fault. I need to pull away from others until there's no good rational reason, it's definitely an irrational response,
Yeah.
but that is definitely something that I've had to root out of my life, and that looks different over time,
Uh-huh.
it's not something that happens all at once, but that is definitely one of those things that I have to remind myself, "Hey, that's not who I am." Even though that's something that I used to do, and at times I can have that first initial thought in my head pop up that leans in a direction of isolating myself. It's that second and third thought of, all right, look, I'm not going to isolate myself. I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to communicate. I'm going to be open. I'm going to be vulnerable. And let me tell you that shit is very, very easy to do. Speaking of easy questions, being vulnerable, very easy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to me that sometimes we have this moment where we recognize that the solution, like the thing that is going to help, is exactly the thing that we don't wanna do.
Hmm.
And for me, it's almost hard to put a finger on why, but I'll ask you, if for you, the hardest part about hard times is isolation, and often the solution, or part of the solution, and I'll touch on this like a little bit later, but in my opinion, being around other people who are like a part of your life and are going to be
Hmm.
able to hold you up and encourage you and call out the like lies that are running through your head. I think that's a core part of how everyone like ought to approach suffering and hard times and just like
Yeah.
difficult bumps in life. If for you that's like at least a major part of the solution, what do you think it is for you that leans away from people when hard times are happening? If that's part of the, like, how to actually address it.
Yeah. For me, and once more, it's different for everyone, but I think this is probably universal for everyone. It has a lot to do with how we were brought up in our family life and some of the truths or lies that we were led to believe very early on. So to be a little transparent there, I love my family. I love my parents a lot. My father passed away over, I don't know, almost 10 years ago now. But to say that my childhood and going into teenage years as well was not the easiest, speaking of easy, is an understatement. I definitely did not have a very close relationship, especially with my father. And a lot of the time when I do wanna isolate and when a hard situation comes up, it is a lot of behavior that I recognize that came from the lack of relationship that I had with my father. My father is very hardworking Italian who you bust your butt for things, you don't ask for handouts, you don't make excuses, right? And so, sometimes people can shut down in such a way that, oh, they just, they wanna be lazy, they wanna not do the hard thing, they wanna not do and I get that, totally understand. A lot of times for me, it's on the other side of the spectrum of the moment I open my mouth after something has gone wrong, and I've already started to convince myself it's my fault, right? I've already convinced myself of that. And so
Yep.
the moment I open my mouth, the moment I choose to not isolate, there's a big part of me that comes up and says, "You're just making an excuse. You're just trying to, paint a picture for other people to see you in this positive light. But the reality is, you're the reason why this thing happened. You're the mess up here. So you better just keep your mouth shut, keep your nose down, and keep grinding to make things better. Otherwise, anything you say, any kind of connection you try to have with other people it's just you trying to make an excuse, and you're not doing it the right way. And like I said, that does come from my childhood, as much as I wish it was not the reality.
Yeah, I can definitely relate with that. My personality, one of my vices, I guess, is to attempt to control the way I'm viewed or perceived as much as possible by other
Mhm.
people,
Yeah.
and then can leaning into like overemphasizing that to a really unhealthy degree.
Mm,
So there's a big part of me that even though I know community is very, very important, especially when I feel like I'm at fault for a situation or a situation will reflect poorly on me, the last thing I want to do at some level is to air that out to
yeah.
people who like I value the way they perceive me. And sometimes that's exactly what you need to do instead of
Mm,
staying in your own head and letting
absolutely.
those for me it can be like a vicious cycle of things are bad, so I process them poorly or not at all, and then
Mhm.
self-condemn, and then spiral emotionally, and end up responding to the whole situation worse, and things stay bad, and so on and so forth. When sometimes the answer is that I'm not an island, just like
Yeah.
what you're describing.
Yep.
Sometimes my own head is not where all the processing is going to happen most healthily or beneficially. Yeah, interesting. I to kind of take that and run with it myself with the
Mhm.
question of what is the hardest part of hard times? You said isolation. For
Yeah.
me, I think it's funny enough. I don't. I'm not typically viewed as an emotional person, and I don't even view myself as an emotional person, or
Mhm.
like someone who has very very strong emotions anyway. But I think for me, I've recognized over the years that when things are really really hard, it's the fact that my experiences and everything around me, everything I'm feeling and experiencing and just like the hard things around me, it's like resulting in very strong emotional pushes in different directions that tend to override
Mm,
everything else in my head or in my
mm,
heart or however you want to put that. It's like
mhm.
there's things that I believe about life and about who I am and about who God is and about where I'm heading in my existence. And when really, really hard things come up, like suddenly or over time or whatever else, it feels like that experience and the following emotional response can just, it's like I can just forget all the other things I believe, all the other things that have happened in the past. And it's like being so hyper present or so hyper fixated on the things that are going wrong and how they could go worse or how I can't fix them or whatever else, everything
Yeah.
else gets drowned out. No, I
Yeah,
mean
it's like it
it's like
never
part of
existed.
yeah, exactly.
Uh-huh.
And it's part of being human. I think our emotions are very much meant and designed to be stronger than our intellect, and that can be great, and that
Mhm.
can be terrible,
Yeah.
depending on what's going on. Like what you were describing a minute ago about like being a person that Like you were raised to take responsibility for your own actions. That's so good
That's right.
and that's so important, but
Mhm.
then misused, misplaced, I guess, or emphasized in the wrong ways, you can end up being a
Mhm.
very self-condemning person and taking things onto yourself that
Yeah,
have no business like resting on your shoulders. Same thing
absolutely.
with emotions. It's like a very, very important part of being a human being. And I don't think life would be life without your emotions. But man, it sure can be hard to not be a basket case when when life is chaos or things are difficult and your emotions are feeling like that it's over. Like there's no hope and there's nothing I
Yeah,
can do about this. And that spiraling thing. For me, that's the hardest thing about
yeah,
really, really difficult stuff.
yeah, that totally makes sense. This kinda connects to the last easy topic that we had, talking about the gym a little bit and our own personal fitness experience, but really coming down to the discipline of hard things, right? Like, thinking about our emotions and thinking about what you just described, what would it be like when you commit so much of your life day in and day out to, building your body, like, working hard and making sure that you're achieving your fitness journey, and then all of a sudden, something comes out of nowhere, and all those muscles that you built and all that strength that you have just disappears overnight. And it's like, what just happened? And worst part is you don't even notice it sometimes, you know?
Hmm.
And that's what our emotions are, because they, just like we talked about last time, they gotta be built up just like our physical muscles do, right? We need to make sure that we are building our emotional intelligence and training and flexing some of those feelings and how to deal with those feelings in ways that, well, maybe we aren't comfortable with.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I
It's
think
a
it is a very challenging thing that you said, like,
yeah.
just how do I deal with the fact that this is something that I've worked so hard in my life for this to be who I am, but then when something comes up, it's like, man, it feels like all that work is out the window.
Fortunately, it's a learned skill, as
Yeah.
most things in life are. Emotional
Mhm.
intelligence is not necessarily a freebie for everyone. I think some people are born better with their emotions than others, but it's a learned skill for sure. I was talking with a student of mine literally like just a couple days ago, and she was having a very difficult time sorting through emotions, responding to a lot of different things going on in her life. And I was just like, look, I mean, it's hard now, but it is something you have to learn how to process through the things you're thinking, the things that are like learning how to identify what's true and what's not true. Is
Mhm.
that feeling valid? Is that coming from a valid place, or is that coming out of something that I'm believing that is not true? And like emotional intelligence is, again, it's learned, which is a
Yeah.
bummer because sometimes I feel like I'm very slow to learn and I can fall into the exact same traps that I've fallen into over and over and over again. But
Mhm.
yeah, it
Yeah,
is
and
a
and for
process.
me, I feel like there's the other side of that coin too, where it's exciting that it's a learned behavior because and the reason why I say that, the reason why I feel that way is that, I'm a I'm a very skinny guy. I've always have been my whole life to the point that it has, even though I can be very athletic and fit, and we've spoke about this before, I've never been able to put on muscle. I've never really had the discipline to grow in that kind of a strength, journey. Uh, and so it's like it can be really easy for me to feed myself the lie of, well, this is just who I am. There's no need for me to go to the gym and try to work on it, make it better, right?
Mhm.
And like you said, some people, sure, they definitely have a gift, whatever that gift came from their parents or some kind of a spiritual gifting, regardless, that they do have a level of emotional intelligence that is something to be strived for or something that can be admired by others. But let's say that you know that it's not really your cup of tea or it's not something that you are quick to do, like empathizing with other, understanding what it's like to put yourself in someone else's shoes. I'm not
Mhm.
gonna sit here and say it's easy for everyone because, like you just said, it is a learned behavior. It can be very difficult. But what's exciting about it to me is that even though it can be very difficult, anyone can get better at it. anyone can build that muscle, that emotional muscle, and I feel like, man, we really should be motivating and encouraging, especially those who feel like this isn't for them or isn't, their cup of tea, like I said.
Mm,
Actually, you can get better at this. You can get better at being able to identify those emotions in those situations like you were
yeah.
just saying, Nate.
Yeah, and I'll take it a step further.
Mm,
I think learning how to go through the highs and lows of life, I think is also a learned skill. I think
yeah.
you can literally just be adept at going through suffering and go through it in
Mhm.
a way that is beneficial and results in growth in the end rather than self-destructing or having it just be bad and bad
Yeah.
alone. So like, in the Bible, you have Paul writing from prison in Philippians, and he says, I've learned the secret to like having peace, whether things are good or bad. I've learned the secret to walking in joy that goes beyond my circumstances. And I mean, you can tell me if this is something that you've seen in your own life or can relate with, but I've over time and kind of being forced to sink or swim, I guess, when life has gotten really, really hard.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I've learned how to get better at dealing with the emotional side, but also like running to the things, like to the tools that I have at my
Mm,
disposal to be able to walk through suffering in a way
mm,
that like allows me to carry peace, like in spite of the crazy stuff, and joy, and then ultimately grow from the process instead of just like, I'm just going to try to stay alive and then wait till this
yeah.
is over. Like that's better than drowning, but what's even better than that is learning to like walk and move forward and progress
Yes.
from the process, which is like from a biblical perspective. Again, you and I are both Jesus followers, but
Mhm.
one of the coolest things about the message of the Bible, whether you're a Jesus follower or not, you've got to admit this is a cool picture, is the idea that God that God is able to take things that are genuinely bad and hopeless from the perspective of the world and use them for our good. Like
Mm,
as we trust him and follow him, he's actually able to take things that are just pure bad and use them for good. So that's one of the things that I would say has kept me able to grow through the hardest things that have hit me in life is the trust that my God can use it for my good. And invariably, in my experience, ultimately, it has been for my good. Like the worst things that have happened to me, in the end, God has taken the bad things and created good from them as I've trusted Him and followed Him. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Quick, to take a like the next step in the conversation. If you were to be asked, what are some of the what are some of the things that you've tried or some of the responses that you've had to suffering in the past that have absolutely not helped? How would you
that's a
respond?
that's a good question. I mean, my first thought again goes right back to the me being my own worst critic, right? But there's another side of that where it can be real easy to swing to the other spectrum and try to act like that there's not a problem at all
Mm,
to begin with.
yeah.
That's definitely something that I have been guilty of, and I try really hard to make sure is also not a response that I have to anything in my current life. But, it can be really easy to see a problem, to see conflict, whenever that is your conflict, your relationships conflict, your friends or anything, and then just act like, "Oh, it's no big deal. Let me
Mhm,
sweep it under the rug,"
mhm,
or "It doesn't that's not really a problem," or, and then what that turns into is, it turns into a lack of communication, right? It turns into, once more, a lack of being vulnerable and transparent whenever especially if it's in a relationship, but just in life in general. I think that that is definitely something where I bounce between those two extremes where going from, "Yeah, there definitely is a problem, and it's completely my fault, and I should have been
oh,
able to
yeah,
prevented it," to, "Oh, no, everything's okay. What are you talking about? I don't need to work on anything. Let's just act like everything's hunky dory."
yeah. Yeah, yeah, moderation ends up being
Mm.
healthy,
Oh, yes.
in many ways, because
Yeah.
the extreme action of like going nuclear on a situation is very rarely called for in my experience.
Yeah.
But then the ostrich response of jamming your head in the sand and being like,
Yeah.
everything will get better as long as I ignore it and self medicate with,
Yeah.
doom scrolling on my phone or distracting myself for as long as possible. That's also not really the answer. And I think we saw how devastating it is are when people respond to the difficulties in their life with self-medication and distraction. I think we saw when COVID hit
Mm,
that eventually you're going to hit a time in your life when you're unable to distract yourself at the level that you need.
mm,
And the hard questions and the
big fan of.
difficulties and the lack of self-fulfillment, etc., start to become unavoidable. I mean, it's it's stats that the suicide rate went up like in
Yeah.
a devastating way during COVID because of all the
Yeah.
isolation. And people
Yeah.
couldn't get out and distract themselves and continue to do things at the level they were doing them before. I mean, it's been years and we're still trying to get a grasp on how devastating it was for mental health and for the suicide rate.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, ignoring a problem doesn't make it go away. At the same time, there is a level of like you just calm down a little bit. Give yourself some time to
Yeah.
maybe not make highly emotional decisions. But in terms of really, really big life events that are not going away overnight, those are the times when you've really got to learn how to deal with the emotions, to deal with the negative thoughts, to deal with it, like learning how to walk through it instead of just
Mhm.
hoping that it disappears one day.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and you bringing up COVID and just the concept of, some things are happen in life that just aren't gonna disappear overnight. It kinda makes me think about a current event right now. I know that you're from Florida. I know not originally, but you spent a lot of time of your life in Florida, and
Yep.
I actually spent a number of years there as well. And not too long ago, I think just last week and the week before that, Florida just got hit by some pretty devastating hurricanes.
Yeah.
And I know that we've been talking a lot right now about the emotional side of things and dealing with trauma sometimes, or even hard relationships. But man, like we all have hurricanes in life, but these people in Florida, they experienced a very literal hurricane, some different times right in a row. And so I don't know, my thought right now, or my question, here's an easy question to you, is if you had to talk to someone right now who they lost their home, their business that they just started just went under, or some kind of huge devastation has happened because of this hurricane, um, how would you encourage them? Like, what can we do if someone fits into that category and they're listening to this podcast right now? What can we say to them that would actually be genuine and helpful and meaningful in their life?
Yeah. I mean, I think, and you and I will both have probably our own answers for this. But for me, there have been a few, I guess, keys in my mind or tools that have consistently been the difference maker in whether I'm able to walk through really difficult times in a healthy way or whether
Mm,
I'm going to spiral.
mhm.
One of them we've brought up repeatedly, and that's community.
Yeah,
Having people around me that are able to help from a physical perspective, but
mm,
also even from a mental or spiritual perspective, and reminding me of what's true and keeping me from feeling like I'm isolated and from the self-condemnation or from the sense of hopelessness or whatever else. You mentioned like, your friends, but also your wife who's your best friend.
yeah,
The same is true for Savannah and I. We've been married 14 years, and I mean, a chunk of our story. 8 years ago, she was diagnosed with brain cancer, and
yeah,
that
yeah,
came ridiculously suddenly out of nowhere.
mhm,
Like everything about life was just like up in the air. And the the hardest time, like the hardest part was the first few years, and more than that, the first few months, but specifically the first 2 weeks of being in the ICU with her.
yeah,
And we had like both of us were trying to wrap our minds around what life even was. But one of the most fundamental one of the most fundamental ways that community manifested itself to us, and like the importance of doing life together with each other in the midst of suffering, was
Mhm,
like, yes, it was all of the messages and phone calls from friends around the nation. Yes, it was people coming in and supporting us. Yes, it was family taking care of our, 3-year-old and 1-year-old, like
mm,
while we were in the ICU. But
mm,
also for Savannah and I going through it together, we were so up and down, but it seemed like whenever I was bottoming out and hopeless, she would be full of hope. And then the opposite would be true. She would have the moments where like she was just full dooming, and then I would be the one who was full of hope and was more based in truth and reality, and we would balance each other the heck out. And
absolutely.
I don't know what either of us would have done without each other there to support and to hold each other up and to speak truth into the life of the other one when we were in the midst of like really deep in the valley. So
Mhm,
the community element, because not everybody is married, not everybody has that relationship, but the basis of that, which is having people, putting yourself in a place where you are intentionally connected with a group of people who care about you to the point that they will go through the hard time with you,
yes,
and they will speak what is true to you, and you being humble enough to hear the truth and like investing into community to the point that you have people that you trust to speak into your life. I
mm,
don't know how anybody can go through really difficult times alone. I
yeah,
don't think I don't think you're supposed to. I don't think
yeah,
you were ever supposed to. I mean, what things look like for me now, along with my marriage to Savannah, I have a group that I meet with once a week for a few hours, and they're all over the nation. So I can't meet with them physically, but we hop on a Discord call and we talk for a couple hours about like, okay, here's what I'm going through. Here are the things I'm trying to do. Here's how I succeeded. Here's how I failed. And like we've had repeatedly, we'll have like 10 people in the group or something, or 5 people in the group that night, or whatever number. And there will be like 1 or 2 people who are absolutely bottoming out,
mm,
who are spiraling, who are hopeless, who are like, guys, like, and not even coming in like, guys, I feel bad, please help me, but just being like, this is how it is. It's terrible. It's awful. There's nothing good about my life. And just throwing that out there.
yeah,
And the other guys who are like more walking in that like things are a little more sturdy for them and they can see with a little less, they can see things a little more clearly than the person who's in the valley at the moment, being
yeah,
able to speak truth to each other and hold each other up, and then see the arc of the life of like everyone in the group. And slowly it's like as we respond in the right way and as we stay rooted in community, things leveling out, and then being like, guys, thank you so much for being there in that moment. It's like community, as much as I don't want to do the work for community, and as much as my
yeah,
personality is more the
that's
introverted and I don't like to
it's
be
harder for an
vulnerable.
introvert, yeah,
Yeah, that's me for sure, but it's like I've been through enough junk
mhm,
that I have to have it. And I'm convinced that human beings have to have it. That's been one of the single biggest make or break elements for me.
yeah, and, it is harder for an introvert for sure, but I would say that, as an extrovert, it's sometimes hard for them to be sincere and genuine, right? And
Mm,
that's in that same concept, someone who can show up to some of those meetings, like, you have to make an intentional choice of, "I'm not just gonna put a smile on my face and act like everything's hunky dory," like the ostrich response that we were just talking about, right? And I'm
yep.
also not gonna isolate the other extreme and say that everything's my fault. I'm gonna try my best to find the middle ground. I'm gonna be genuine and vulnerable. And so, yeah, no, I definitely relate to what you're saying there, and you're right, talking about, the hurricane question, someone going through it, and, we both probably have our own responses to it, and I think, when you say that we're not meant to deal with hard things alone. Oh, man, I think as easy as a question that we might have had at the beginning, that answer really does sum it up on so many levels, and it's not a simple answer, and by that I mean there's many layers to it, and there's
Yeah.
a lot of depth. But I do think about some of the times in my life where it was a category 2, 3, 4 hurricane in my life emotionally.
Of
But
course.
I also think about when I was a kid and, my family, their house got flooded when I was a kid. And then it happened again maybe 15 years later to the point that it completely destroyed our house. And that happened right around the time where my father passed away. And that was a very, very difficult time in my life. I can say that honestly, going back to something that I mentioned earlier, that I did have opportunities to reconnect with my father in the last year of his life or so. And I'm very grateful for that. I'm very grateful that I was able to grow my emotional intelligence and really put myself in his shoes and what he had to deal with, not only in my childhood, but before I even showed up on the scene. Like it really helped me understand a lot of things that even though they weren't perfect, it helped me understand, why he is the way he is, and we were able to make a good connection before he
Mm.
passed away. And I'm very grateful for that because when he did pass away, combined with the storm that took my parents' house, and combined with trying to be strong enough for my mother who was falling apart, my response was isolation. I really felt like I did not have people there for me, and I wish that I did. And it was a very, very difficult time in my life. But looking back on it, I am very grateful for the few people who were actually there because a lot of times I know, for me at least, it can feel like I'm alone. It can feel like I don't have an opportunity like you have, where you have something happening every single week where these people are holding each other accountable, but encouraging one another. Which, by the way, you went out of your way to make happen, right? It didn't just fall into your lap, right?
Yeah. Yep.
But, let's say, yeah, let's say, like anyone who's in that survival mode, and they've been in that survival mode that you were talking about for a long time in their life, they're not gonna have something like that. They're gonna feel very isolated. They might have a few friends. And that's what I'm trying to say is that no matter where you are in life, at least for me, like at the time where I felt the most alone and the most isolated, and also the most that everything is my fault, I still had people who cared. I still had people who were willing to share in that suffering, and that was a game changer for me, because if those people weren't there, or if I couldn't get past whatever it was that was in front of me, blinding me to realize that the truth that they actually were there, then I have no clue what would have happened in my life. And so
Mm.
that's how I would edify and try to encourage someone right now who is dealing with the physical hurricanes that happen in Florida, and anyone who's listening to this who's dealing with something that feels just as devastating, the emotional hurricanes. Like, you gotta know that no matter how you feel and no matter how prepared you may or may not be in your life, there really are people out there. There really is someone else who cares about you, who really does want to support you in these moments of weakness that we all have, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And often, and I told you I was talking to a student just the other day who was going through a kind of emotional spiral. And there, one of the pieces of advice I was giving is what I'm giving, like what I was saying just a moment ago. Like, you
Mhm.
need someone to process these things through, because sometimes those things you're thinking in your head are not true. They're emotional responses, and you need to kind of air that out and bounce it off someone else. And their response was, I feel like I'm going to be a bother, or I feel like I'm going to be
Mhm.
rejected if I do that.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I think that's one of the most effective. If I was going to try to keep somebody spiraling, what I would do is make them feel like they have no right or place, or they'll be a bother or an annoyance, or nobody will respond positively if they do reach out. I would
Mhm.
say, don't even bother doing that. because it's not going to help, or you'll be a bother, or you're not going to get the response you're looking for. Nobody actually cares. That's exactly what I would tell somebody if I wanted to keep them
Yeah.
trapped in like isolated suffering.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes you've got to just you've got to rip the Band-Aid off. You've got to do the uncomfortable thing. You've got to go proverbially not knocking on doors relationally to
Mhm.
find somebody who you can lean on a little bit, whether it's asking for help mentally or processing or financially or whatever else. Sometimes you just gotta take the step, and it's never as black and white as that. And I do know how it is, but like ultimately, the principle there is you need somebody. You need somebody, or more likely, some buddies. That
Yeah.
phrase, "it takes a village," which is usually like used in reference to raising a child. I think it takes a village to be a human, man.
Mhm.
I think it takes a village to go through life because we weren't designed to be islands. It's not good that we should be alone, right?
That's right. Yeah, and I think something that you said there that it's a principle that can be brought into a lot of different places, including the workplace. I know that, for you personally, Nate, that you are a teacher and you have this gift that is absolutely incredible. And anyone who gets a chance to hear you speak, I definitely encourage anyone to go out of their way because it's definitely worth it. For me, I've personally been in the business world for the past I don't know, 10 years. And I would encourage that something that I had, and this comes up in interviews, by the way, interviews that I have had myself and interviews that I've interviewed other people applying to work for me. I've had to learn exactly what you're talking about when it comes to being vulnerable
Mm,
and willing to rip off the Band-Aid and come and talk to me as your manager when something's going wrong, when you don't know what's happening or you're confused or there's some kind of blocker that's occurring here. Like, I had to learn this first in order to really understand what kind of manager I wanted to be to prevent this in the people who work with me. And it's a you can come talk to me. You're not gonna be a bother. Like, you're not. Like, and I know what that feeling's like. I know what it's like to feel like you're being pushed into the deep end in a workplace and to truly, like, try to always put your best foot forward and have everyone think as best as possible of you. And so because of that, you're so hesitant to say, "Man, I need help here," or "I didn't
yeah,
understand what that person was talking about." And the sooner that I can get people I wish that was something that I learned sooner in my work life, but the sooner I can get my team to get past that and to understand that, "Look, you actually can be open and honest with me, and I'm not gonna hold that against you. I'm not going to be thinking less of you because you don't know how to do something or you didn't understand this situation. And if anything, I'm gonna think higher of you. I'm gonna be more impressed with the person who says, "Hey, Tony, I need help here. Like, I really don't think I can do this on my own." Like, that's gonna be an impressive thing to me. And so
yeah,
when you said that, it made me think of work life, and I wanted to encourage anyone who maybe work is not a pleasant thing for most people, and so I want to encourage people in that environment as well.
yeah, totally. I will. I'll add one other element here because community is a big part of it, but I think the other side of the coin of no man is an island
Mhm.
is the examined life is not worth living. And so I think there's an element. This has been the other part for me. I need people in my life, as we said, to process with me, to speak truth, to encourage, et cetera, et cetera. But there is I think somebody that has no kind of internal depth to like their own souls, if that makes sense. to their
Mhm.
own minds, their own ability to process and evaluate and grow in the skill individually of going through hard times, I think there's a shallowness that can develop in it as a human, where it's like you need to be around other people. You need to be directed by other people. You need truth to come from other people. You need processing to happen with other people. That's all valuable. But I think that the element of learning how to process and to evaluate and to examine your own life, I think is the other. I think that's the other core skill that for me has been the difference between falling apart in hard times or going through it with peace and joy and growth. For
Yeah.
me, when Savannah was diagnosed, I had to learn how to get into a habit of journaling like
Yeah.
crazy. And I just journaled. I hate journaling. I don't like doing it. I hate my own handwriting, but I just started doing it on a computer, just like on a laptop,
Nice.
and I would just write out every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, everything I was thinking, everything I was feeling, and day after day after day for the first handful of years after her diagnosis, things were so hard, like on a day-to-day basis. I would wake up not wanting to live through the day.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
would feel every bit of like the negativity, the hopelessness, the anger, the frustration at my situation, at God, at where I was at. And I I found that if I didn't take time to process that alone, that like nebulous those feelings, those building up in the background, those feelings and thoughts, if I just attempted to live through life anyway and ignore them, they just built up and I would end up depressed and angry and hopeless and lashing
Yeah.
out and everything else. Like it felt like it had a fog on it. So I had to journal again 1, 2, 3 times a day, just writing out all those things I felt, all those things that I was thinking. And for me, again, being a follower of Jesus, I would hold those things up to God and say, God, are these things true?
Mm.
And I still have all of my journals, just years and years of journal pages that start off very offensively because I was so angry, so frustrated, so upset. But also by the end of that processing time, I would end with like a sense of, okay, those things I was feeling, those that wasn't what's true about the situation. This is what
Yeah.
I need to be
Identify
doing.
that.
I can see the path forward. Like, God, I can see the things that I've forgotten about who you are and about who I am and so on and so forth. I mean, from a Bible perspective, that's so much about what the book of Psalms is
Mhm.
people processing all of these hard things and doubts and frustrations and then working through them and then rooting themselves in a picture of what's true again. For me, that was absolutely invaluable for years. Today, I don't journal as much anymore. What I do now is a process called an examine, where
Okay.
and I do this 2 to 3 times a day, where I sit and I sit alone and quiet, and I think about everything I've done as best I can, and like the last chunk of the day or the whole day or the previous day. I think about the things I've been thinking, and I kind of just examine those closely and say, is this am I walking through life or through this time in the way that I know I should be? Am I Are my thoughts lining up with the things that I want them to line up with? Am I falling into destructive habits? Are there blind spots? Are there ways I'm treating other people that I shouldn't be? Just by taking the time to actually process through the way I'm living my life and the things I'm
Mm.
thinking. And again, for
Yeah.
me, that next step is saying, God, what do you want me to do with this? Is there anything I need to be moving toward or moving away from? Is there anything I should be changing or continuing? And for me, those are the things that keep me moving forward in life rather than staying static. And
Yes.
there is no neutral ground as human
Yeah, no,
beings.
that's true. We talked about that last time.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
we did, didn't we? There's no
Yeah.
neutral. You're either stagnating, which is not stagnating really as a human. I think you're moving backwards,
Yeah, you're
or
falling
you're
downhill.
moving forward. So I think for me, it's the two sides of the coin are community to do life with
Mhm.
and to encourage and hold you up and help you process, but also learning how to develop that individual depth and examining your own life. And then, of course, the third thing, but not everyone's here for that, is the hope of the gospel and the God who, for me, has said, if you trust me, I can take even the worst things that happen to you and use them for your good. So I mean, I don't know how you would describe it, but for me, the last 8 years have been by far the worst of my life. And it
Mm,
hasn't been close. But
yeah.
at the same time, I can say without exaggerating at all and in full honesty that I've had more consistent peace and joy over the last 8 years than any other season of my life as an adult. And I've also grown more. And
Yep.
my family, our dynamic is better than it's ever been. My marriage is better than it's ever been. My relationship with my kids is better than it's ever been, while going through what's been by far the hardest, longest period of suffering, like of my life. So for me, it's that last element that is the real kicker. I'm not sure how I could go through that without that hope, and then God's presence and direction and ability to invert the bad into the good somehow. But I think the universally applicable things here for people who don't want that last part, which I would really recommend you reconsider. But
Mhm.
for that last part, I think you have to have people. You're not made to be alone,
That's
and you've
right.
also got to learn. You've got to learn to be self-evaluating and
Yeah.
forward moving
It
morally.
really is that middle ground, and the first time you brought it up earlier in the conversation, I thought to myself, "Man, don't even get me started on the importance of, middle ground." I think that's a whole 'nother conversation in and of itself.
Yep.
But, yeah, I mean, really understanding that it is a journey, and it's not easy to take that next step, and maybe that first step for you is the isolating thing, making sure that you're not by yourself, making sure that you know that it's not your fault, like, you're not a failure, like, there are people who care. I know that that's gonna resonate with a lot of people. But maybe the next step for you is one beyond that or differently where it's like, "Hey, I do need to evaluate myself. I need to make sure that I'm not using my friends or my relationship or my family as a crutch, so to speak, but instead, I truly am digging in deep in ways that aren't easy, aren't instinctive a lot of times, and truly figuring out what that identity for yourself looks like. Because at the end of the day, a lot of the things what you're describing, Nate, what I hear is, people dealing with insecurities on a day-to-day basis, and we all have them,
Yep.
and identifying them is real important, and having community can help with that. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many times someone else points out something that I'm insecure about or something that might be a weakness or whatever I'm blind to it or not. At the end of the day, you can bring a horse to water, but the horse has to drink it. The person themselves has to be the one to make that choice to embrace a little bit more change today than maybe I did yesterday. And
Yep.
so I think what you're saying is applicable regardless of whenever you're a Christian or not. We strongly believe that there's a lot of Christian principles here, but at the end of the day, suffering is not just a Christian thing, is it?
Yep. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's right. The great equalizer. The rain
yeah,
falls on the just and the unjust and
yeah,
everyone in between. Well, man, I think this has been a fruitful conversation. I feel like I've learned.
absolutely. And thinking about that a little bit more, just thinking about what it really means to deal with this suffering, and maybe even what we talked about last time, the discipline of hard times and what that looks like to someone who is a Christian versus someone who's not a Christian, like how that applies across the board universally. It really makes me think of another really easy question.
Oh boy. Here we go.
Yeah. What is a Christian really?
Well, that sounds like a good topic for next time. So, if that sounds interesting to
Just
you, listeners out in the pod space, we got another easy question coming your way. What is a Christian anyway?
all
All
right.
right, Tony. Well, I'll catch you next time when we have some more easy conversations. Take the easy approach, if you know what I'm saying.
Absolutely. Every time.
All right, signing off. We'll catch you guys next time.